The sea was black and breathless when the lookout shouted land. In the small hours of October 12, 1492, the Atlantic stopped being the edge of Europe and turned into a passageway. On the beach, the smell of sargassum mixed with smoke from cooking fires as silhouettes with shell ornaments stared at the white bellies of foreign sails. No one on that shore knew the world had just tilted and that the name Guanahaní would soon be overwritten. What winds and ambitions pushed a Genoese navigator in Castilian service to gamble west? And why did that gamble become unstoppable? In 1492, with Granada conquered and rivals fencing the eastern spice routes, a court hungry for prestige married compass, portolan charts, and caravel hulls to a bold miscalculation about the size of the earth. How did the first contact on the Antilles actually unfold when two systems of meaning touch sand at the same moment? Taíno swimmers with straight black hair and cotton waistcloths approached with parrots, cassava bread, and spun thread, while sunburned sailors in wool and linen tasted sweet fruit and scribbled fevered notes that mixed wonder and arithmetic. What did each side think the other wanted in those first cautious exchanges? The visitors saw gold nose ornaments and imagined rivers of metal, while the islanders read the strangers through hospitality, curiosity, and a wary tally of iron, horses, and intent. Why did the ritual of taking possession with banners and a wooden cross matter more than it seemed? Because a legal formula spoken on a beach no one there had ever heard gave documentary weight to an asymmetry that would outlive the voices of the witnesses. Who were the Taíno before the sails appeared, and what rhythms did contact begin to break? They were gardeners of yucca and conuco mounds, fishers of clear shallows, singers of aritos under the guidance of caciques, whose authority braided kinship, exchange, and ceremony. How did misreading begin to spread faster than words could keep up? A bell given as courtesy was read as a bond, a nod interpreted as consent, and gifts that meant friendship to one side became signs of subordination to the other. Why did naming the islands matter beyond cartography, and what did erasing older names do? Each new Christian label inked in a ledger traveled to Seville and Rome, while the Taíno words remained in the wind, and that quiet erasure prepared the ground for other erasures to follow. What happened at the fragile fort called La Navidad, and why did it foreshadow the century to come? A wrecked ship forced 39 men to stay with promises of restraint and trade, but when their commander returned, he found burnt posts, scattered bones, and a silence that said greed and insult had met retaliation. How did the second voyage in 1493 transform an adventure into an apparatus? 17 ships arrived with friars, soldiers, artisans, seeds, cattle, and pigs, and the plan changed from finding lands to founding towns. Why did animals and grasses shift power as surely as lances and prayers? Hooves and snouts broke soils and schedules. Sugarcane and pastures claimed space where conucos had stood, and the foreign stomach began to organize the day. How did tribute become repartimiento and then encomienda? And what did the change of words conceal? Gold dust demanded disciplined hands and long days, and a system that promised protection and conversion formalized coercion, while hunger, flight, and falling birth rates carved absences into the villages. What work did the cross do, and what work did conscience begin to do in its shadow? Friars learned words with speed and baptized with zeal, while other witnesses described lash and chain. And from that tension, a question sharpened about souls, swords, and the bounds of dominion. Why did disease move faster than any fleet and deeper than any decree? Smallpox, measles, and influenza traveled along breath and skin, and bodies without prior defenses collapsed in days, emptying bateyes and breaking the memory that held techniques of farming and fishing. How did the Casa de la Contratación turn distant pain into ledgers and routes? In Seville, a bureaucracy gathered pilots, charts, and permits, and each voyage became an entry in a system of licenses, taxes, and royal fifths that could finance the next horizon. Why did the Antilles become the hinge of an empire still learning its shape? Because those islands were storehouse, school, and lighthouse, deciding who crossed toward mainland riches and teaching logistics, metallurgy, and fiscal arithmetic to a new generation of captains. How did techniques practiced in the islands travel to the mainland alongside men who had learned them? Negotiation with local lords, rapid use of interpreters, calibrated shock and alliance, and a sense for rumor as reconnaissance turned the Caribbean into a rehearsal for conquests to come. What did the Taíno see in iron and horses, and what did the newcomers see in cotton and tobacco? The islanders tied unprecedented strength to the realm of spirits, while the strangers imagined markets and habits waiting to be born in cities they had not yet seen. Why does any of this matter to the present when we check a map or drink something sweet? Because supply chains, languages, and tastes carry long shadows, and the first contact arranged the table where 5 centuries of diners would sit and argue about justice and profit. How did distance itself become an instrument of power in the decade after landfall? Messages curated across the ocean could reward, excuse, or erase, and the sea filtered which version of events became law and which became hearsay. Who stood at the core of survival when institutions were young and hunger was old? Indigenous women mediated words, kept gardens alive, raised children of mixed parentage, and bore the cost that rarely reached the page, yet often preserved the future. Why was violence not merely accident, but grammar? And how quickly did that grammar get standardized? Punitive expeditions and humiliations taught repeatable lessons island by island, securing tribute in the short term while undermining the human base that made tribute possible at all. How did indigenous knowledge slip into European maps, and what did the cartouche hide? Canoe routes, currents, sandbars, and seasons were translated into lines and rums, while ritual corridors and kin networks vanished from the paper that guides ships and taxes. What did gold do to time, and how did it reclock the day? The shimmer in a wooden pan turned dawn to dusk labor into weighed obligation, replacing harvest cycles with the ticking of ounces and the tally of overseers. How did the 1490s close for the admiral, and what kept moving when his reputation faltered? Inquiry, lawsuits, and rivals gnawed at authority, but by then the structure walked on its own legs, powered by ports, prayers, paperwork, and the will of men who had grown up on Caribbean coasts. Why must we tell the Antillean beginning with both admiration for seamanship and clarity about domination? Because a single story cannot carry the cargo of this crossing, and a balanced account can teach humility to power and voice to those long rendered inaudible. How did immediate sensation steer choices beneath the official words of decrees? The creak of leather on a horse, the cold touch of steel, the sweet smoke of tobacco, and the salt on skin made instincts faster than doctrine and set the tone of each encounter. What did hope do on both sides before it broke? And how did that fracture ripple forward? Europeans sought Asia and settled for archipelago, then hoped for rivers of metal and found dust and debt, while island communities hoped for allies against rivals and met appetites without clear boundary. Why is the word discovery itself part of the story rather than a neutral label? Because it claims a silence before the sails that was never real, and because who names the past helps decide the distribution of present dignity. How did the sugar future announce itself in the ruins of La Navidad and the ledgers of Seville? Cut canes and boiling pans would follow livestock and timber, and the Antilles would grow into a matrix of mills, prayers, and punishments that braided Europe, Africa, and America. Why does the Caribbean's role as hinge teach us to hear hinges today? Because the squeak of a door opening in 1492 still echoes when we debate borders, languages, debt, and repair, and because recognizing the sound can make policy more precise and memory more honest. What remained on the sand when the first decade closed and 2 small ships rocked at anchor beyond the reef? Interlaced footprints of bare feet and boots, A cross leaning in the wind, a handful of new words on a chart, and families counting losses while the tide erased details. How do we carry both the seamanship that shortened oceans and the harm that shortened lives without flattening either? By narrating complexity with steady hands, by weighing courage and greed without theatrical absolution, and by letting the islands speak in the tense of endurance rather than disappearance. What would it mean to relight old names on classroom maps and city signs without pretending the past did not cut? It would mean practicing a just attention that returns visibility to the people who knew these coasts by other words and rhythms. And that attention would change how we measure wealth and loss. Why does the first contact, when told well, feel less like a statue and more like a moving tide? Because nothing in it was fixed, and because its motions still tug at harbors we use, at tongues we speak, and at the prices we pay for sweetness, speed, and forgetting. What can we learn from the mismatch between a legal ceremony on a beach and the moral reality it claimed to sanctify? We can learn to distrust eloquence when it stands on the back of those who cannot refuse, and to test every banner and blessing against the lived grain of ordinary lives. How did the archipelago turn strangers into relatives, however reluctant the relation? Food, words, debts, and children tied the shores together, and the ties could not be untied even when violence tried to deny the knot. Why does the end of this beginning refuse to give us a neat lesson? Because honesty keeps both the brilliance of navigation and the brutality of domination in frame, and real understanding is harder and more durable than a slogan. What remains when we look back from the present and let the horizon fill our eyes like it did for a lookout in the dark? A hinge that never stopped turning, a ledger that still asks for revisions, and a question that refuses to be quiet in classrooms and streets. The Spanish expansion began with wary handshakes, ambiguous promises, and the rough learning of an administrative yoke that tightened with practice. Knowing this does not doom us to repetition, but it does ask us to face the mixture of ambition and faith that made it possible, and to choose with fuller sight the doors we open next. The Caribbean was the hinge of a door that swung wide and never swung shut again. Are we willing to tell it in a way that loosens the hinge for those who still carry most of its weight?